The bitter wind of Glacier Zill howled through the jagged purple rocks, carrying ice crystals that stung like microscopic daggers against any exposed skin. Captain Juno, J. Fletcher adjusted the thermal setting on her composite armor for the third time in an hour, cursing the planet's merciless climate under her breath. 3 days had passed since her transport vessel, the Aurora's Spear, had been ambushed near the planet's orbit, forcing her to eject in an escape pod that crashed into this frozen wasteland. The makeshift shelter she'd constructed from emergency supplies and local materials stood as her only refuge against the elements. A small heating unit glowed orange in the center, fighting valiantly against the penetrating cold. Juno meticulously checked her remaining ammunition and supplies: 2 assault rifles, 1 sniper rifle, 3 sidearms, and enough rations to last another 4 days if carefully rationed. The rescue beacon transmitted its silent plea into space, but she knew extraction was delayed by at least 48 hours due to Dahar patrols in the sector. "Just hold position," she muttered to herself, the words forming small clouds in the frigid air. Standard operating procedure: hold position and wait for extraction. Juno was no stranger to hostile environments. In her 12 years as a Class 9 space cavalry trooper with the Alpha 7 Squadron, she had endured conditions that would break most soldiers. But something about Glacier Zill set her nerves on edge. Perhaps it was the unnatural purple hue of the rocks that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, or the ice forests with their crystalline structures that hummed eerily when the wind passed through them. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that somewhere on this frozen rock, Dahar forces were establishing footholds in human territory, experimenting with weapons that violated every interplanetary treaty signed in the last century. As night fell, Juno ventured outside briefly to gather more fuel for her heating unit. The twin moons cast an ethereal blue glow across the landscape, transforming the ice plains into a ghostly mirror. She allowed herself a moment of appreciation for the deadly beauty before returning to the pragmatic task of survival. Unknown to her, 3 pairs of eyes tracked her movements from a high vantage point, nearly a kilometer away. Commander Lazera lowered her thermal binoculars, the yellow grid pattern of her reptilian eyes narrowing in calculation. Her scaled skin, a mottled pattern of green and gray, blended perfectly with the shadows of the rocks. As the ranking officer of this Dahar scouting unit, she had received the intelligence report directly from Central Command just hours earlier. A lone human warrior is holding position in a temporary shelter, awaiting delayed rescue. Eliminate the target to prevent the spread of information that humans can penetrate the border region. Beside her, Bella, a 4-legged lupin with dense gray fur, shifted nervously. Her acute sense of smell had picked up the human scent even before the thermal scanners had located her. "Commander," Bella whispered, her voice carrying a natural tremor. "The human weapons have a range of 500 meters. Our plasma rifles only 200. They lack shield equipment, but the ice and rock terrain doesn't favor a close approach." On Lazera's other side, Trita, an arachnoid with multiple eyes and a cold analytical mind, studied the digital readout from her scanner. Her voice came out in the characteristic monotone of her species. "The minimum ratio for assured victory should be at least 5.1. With only 3 of us, we are at a statistical disadvantage." Lazera's scaled hand cut through the air, silencing both subordinates. "Central Command requires results, not excuses for delay." Her voice carried the hissing undertone common to reptilians. "We have a weapon that will neutralize the human without requiring direct engagement." Trita's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of curiosity. "You refer to the Vzak?" "Precisely." Lazera's mouth formed what passed for a smile among her species, a tight drawing back of scaled lips to reveal needle-like teeth. "The biological weapon will render our approach unnecessary." Back at their camp, Lazera led her subordinates to a secured section where a small laboratory had been established. Inside, under the pale blue glow of plasma lamps, several containers lined the walls. Lazara approached one particular box lined with purple moss and carefully lifted the lid. "The Vzak," she announced, as Bella and Trita peered into the container. Inside, a creature approximately 10 centimeters long with multiple jointed legs moved slowly over the moss. Its carapace reflected the blue light with an iridescent sheen. "An arthropod?" Trita asked, leaning closer with her scanner. "A genetically modified one," Lazara confirmed. "It has been engineered to seek out mammalian body heat, particularly the human range. When it makes contact, it injects a neurotoxin that causes respiratory failure within 10 to 15 minutes. Bella backed away slightly, her natural caution making her wary of the creature. "And it can distinguish between different heat signatures?" "It's been programmed to target the specific body temperature range of humans," Lazara said. "We've been adjusting the dose with a compound of THC and native melatonin to ensure maximum effectiveness." Trita extended one of her limbs toward the microscope station. "May I examine it more closely?" Lazara nodded, and Trita carefully extracted the Vzak with a pair of tongs, placing it under the optical microscope. The magnified image revealed the complex neural structure and the venom sacs located near the creature's mandibles. "Fascinating," Trita commented. "The venom delivery system is remarkably efficient. The neural targeting is precise. Once released onto the ground, it will move directly toward the target and cannot be recalled," Lazara warned. "We must be absolutely certain of deployment location." They spent the next hour studying the human's movement patterns through their surveillance equipment. The woman maintained a disciplined routine, periodically checking the perimeter of her shelter before returning inside, always keeping her weapons within reach. "She's experienced," Lazara observed. "Not a typical transport pilot. Military training. Likely special operations given her equipment loadout." "Which makes her all the more dangerous," Bella added, her ears flattening against her skull. "Or valuable," Trita interjected. "A captured special operative could provide significant intelligence." Lazara considered this briefly before shaking her head. "Our orders are elimination, not capture. The risk is too great." As the planet's harsh day cycle began again, Lazara led her team to a vantage point closer to the human's shelter. Through their enhanced binoculars, they could see Captain Fletcher moving around her shelter, gathering materials to reinforce the structure against the intensifying wind. "She's conserving energy, maintaining her position as protocol dictates," Lazara analyzed. "She knows rescue is delayed by at least 48 hours. She will be resilient, but resource-limited." The commander reached into a specialized container and extracted the Vzak, which had been kept in stasis until this moment. She placed it on a flat rock surface, its multiple legs beginning to twitch as it sensed the environment. "Remain still," she instructed her subordinates. "Any vibration could disorient it." The Vzak began to move, its body low to the ground as it navigated the terrain with surprising speed. They watched through their optical enhancers as the creature made its way toward the human shelter, weaving through crevices in the rocks and beneath patches of purple moss. Inside her shelter, Juno Fletcher was conducting a routine check of her communications equipment. The rescue beacon continued to transmit, but interference from the planet's unusual magnetic field made direct contact impossible. She sighed, resigned to at least another 2 days of isolation on this frozen rock. A movement outside caught her attention, likely just ice shifting or wildlife. Nevertheless, she reached for her sidearm as she moved to investigate. Years of combat experience had taught her that paranoia was simply good survival instinct by another name. She scanned the perimeter at eye level, seeing nothing unusual in the purplish rocks or the ice formations that had grown overnight. Satisfied, she knelt to gather some of the moss-like growth that burned surprisingly well in her heating unit. The Vzak, having reached the edge of the shelter, sensed the heat signature of its target. It moved silently across the ground, closing the distance to the human female. As Juno reached down, the creature sprang forward, its specialized appendages penetrating the fabric of her pants leg. Juno felt a sharp sting and instinctively swatted at her leg. Her hand made contact with something solid, and she looked down to see a strange arthropod clinging to her pants. A faint odor, like almonds mixed with something metallic, registered in her senses. Acting on instinct, she flung the creature away and drew her sidearm in one fluid motion, firing a single shot that obliterated the Vzak. But it was too late. The neurotoxin had already entered her bloodstream. Within seconds, she felt a tingling sensation spreading from her leg upward. Her vision began to blur around the edges, and her limbs grew heavy. Fighting against the encroaching darkness, Juno stumbled back toward her shelter, her soldier's mind already calculating the nature of the attack and its implications. "Biological weapon," she gasped, reaching for her medical kit before collapsing to the ground. Her last conscious thought was a grim determination. Whoever sent this would pay dearly if she survived. From their observation point, Lazera, Bella, and Trita watched with satisfaction as the human crumpled to the ground. "Success," Lazera declared. "The neurotoxin will cause respiratory failure within minutes." Trita monitored her scanner. "The human's vital signs are decreasing rapidly, body temperature dropping." Is she dead?" Bella asked, her voice betraying both fear and hope. "Soon," Lazera replied confidently. "We will approach to confirm, then report mission completion to Central Command." The three Dahar operatives began their cautious approach, weapons ready, despite their confidence in the Vzak's effectiveness. Lazera led, her plasma pistol drawn, while Bella and Trita flanked her, scanning for any signs of danger. What they couldn't know was that inside the shelter, something extraordinary was happening. The neurotoxin, designed to attack human neural pathways and shut down respiratory function, had encountered an unexpected resistance. Whether due to Juno's specialized military immunization protocols, some quirk of her personal biology, or perhaps an error in the Vzak's engineering, the toxin's effect was not proceeding as designed. Instead of permanent respiratory failure, Juno experienced what amounted to an intense, deep sleep state. Her breathing slowed to near imperceptible levels. Her heart rate dropped dramatically, and her body temperature decreased, all signs that would register as near death on standard scanners. But her brain remained active at a fundamental level, fighting against the toxin's effects. 2 minutes after collapsing, as the Dahar patrol approached within 50 meters of her shelter, Juno Fletcher's eyes snapped open. Her return to consciousness was violent, a desperate gasp for air, muscles seizing, vision swimming with adrenaline-fueled clarity. Military training took over as her cognitive functions reasserted themselves. In seconds, she assessed her situation. Biological attack, enemies approaching, immediate threat to survival. Without hesitation, she reached for her sniper rifle, the weapon she'd kept disassembled but ready since her crash landing. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, assembling the weapon even as her body continued to fight off the last effects of the neurotoxin. Through the scope, she identified 3 figures approaching her position, a reptilian leading, flanked by what appeared to be a lupin and an arachnoid. Dahar forces, just as she had suspected. Her crosshairs settled on the reptilian, clearly the leader based on positioning and bearing. Lazera was the first to sense something was wrong. A soldier's instinct, honed through countless engagements, caused her to pause mid-step. She raised her hand, signaling her subordinates to halt. "Something's not right," she hissed, her reptilian eyes narrowing as she scanned the seemingly abandoned shelter. The shot came before she could issue another command. A hypersonic round tore through the air, grazing Lazera's shoulder armor and sending sparks of orange plasma cascading across the ice. The reptilian commander dove for cover behind a rock formation, her combat training taking over. Bella and Trita weren't as fortunate. Before they could react, Juno had cycled her weapon and fired again. The second shot caught Bella square in the chest, punching through her environmental suit. The Lupin let out a terrible cry, stumbling backward before collapsing onto the ice, her gray fur quickly darkening with blood. Trita attempted to activate her defensive shield, but Juno's third shot found its mark, shattering the arachnoid's primary sensor cluster. Multiple limbs thrashed in a grotesque dance before Trita fell still, her body slumping onto the frozen ground. Lazera, now pinned down by precision fire, activated her emergency beacon and drew her plasma pistol. Central base, alert. Human operative still active. Request immediate. Her transmission was cut short as another round impacted the rock inches from her head, showering her with stone fragments. She returned fire blindly, the blue-green bolts of her plasma weapon cutting through the air toward Juno's position. Captain Fletcher had already changed position, moving laterally along the perimeter of her shelter. The plasma bolts struck empty space, superheating the air where she had been moments before. She fired again, forcing Lazera deeper into cover. "You tried to poison me," Juno called out, her voice carrying clearly across the frozen landscape. "Bad tactical decision." Lazera didn't respond, instead using the sound of Juno's voice to better target her next volley of plasma fire. The bolts came dangerously close, one grazing Juno's armor and sending a wave of heat through the composite material. Recognizing the stalemate, Juno changed tactics. She retreated briefly into her shelter, emerging moments later with a different weapon, a compact assault rifle with an underslung grenade launcher. Taking careful aim, she fired a concussive round that detonated just behind Lazera's position. The explosion sent the reptilian commander tumbling forward, exposed on the open ice. Before she could recover, Juno put a round through her leg, effectively immobilizing her. Lazera hissed in pain, but managed to raise her weapon for one final shot. Juno was faster, her next bullet striking the plasma pistol directly, causing it to explode in a shower of blue-white energy. The reptilian commander screamed as the superheated plasma seared her hand and arm. Captain Fletcher approached cautiously, her rifle trained on the wounded commander. Lazera, despite her injuries, maintained the rigid posture of a Dahar officer, her yellow eyes burning with hatred and a grudging respect. "You should be dead," she hissed through pain-clenched teeth. "I took a nap instead," Juno replied coldly. "Now, you're going to tell me everything about that arthropod and what else you're developing at your base." Lazera's scaled lips pulled back in a defiant snarl. "I will tell you nothing, human." Juno considered this for a moment, then nodded as if expecting the response. "That's fine. The Alliance scientists will extract what they need from your biology. The neurotoxin is of particular interest." Understanding dawned in Lazera's eyes. "You're taking me prisoner." "Consider yourself a research specimen," Juno replied, before striking the reptilian commander with the butt of her rifle, rendering her unconscious. The aftermath of the brief but intense battle left the frozen landscape scarred with plasma burns and scattered with the bodies of Bella and Trita. Juno worked efficiently, applying field restraints to the unconscious Lazera and treating her wounds enough to ensure survival. The commander would be valuable both for intelligence and for understanding the biological weapons being developed. With her prisoner secured, Juno turned her attention to the immediate tactical situation. The Dahar patrol had come from somewhere, and based on their equipment and the specialized nature of the Vzak, a research facility had to be nearby. She needed to locate and assess it before extraction. Using the equipment taken from her prisoners, particularly Trita's sophisticated scanner, Juno was able to trace their path back through the ice fields. After an hour of careful navigation, staying low to avoid detection, she located the Dahar outpost nestled between two rocky outcroppings. The base was small, but well-equipped, clearly a forward research station, rather than a major military installation. perfect for clandestine weapons development on the border of human territory. From her vantage point on a high ridge, Juno counted only a handful of personnel moving between the prefabricated structures. Most significant was a reinforced laboratory module, with biohazard markings visible even from a distance. That would be where the vzok and potentially other biological agents were being developed. A direct assault would be risky, but leaving such a facility intact wasn't an option, especially now that they would be on alert due to their commander's failed return. Juno formulated a plan, using Lazera's command codes, extracted from the equipment on her environmental suit. She could potentially gain access to the base's perimeter defenses. Once inside, she would plant the miniature nuclear charges she carried for emergency demolition purposes. The approach to the base required patience. Juno moved only during the brief periods when the patrol drones were at the furthest points of their search patterns. The purple-tinged ice formations provided adequate cover, and her thermal dampening suit prevented detection by heat sensors. At the perimeter, she interfaced Lazera's command module with the security scanner. For a tense moment, the system processed the authentication. Then, with a soft beep, the barrier deactivated, allowing her access. Inside the compound, Juno moved like a shadow, staying close to the walls of the structures and timing her movements to coincide with the changing of guard positions. She made her way to the laboratory module, bypassing another security checkpoint with Lazera's codes. The interior of the lab revealed the true extent of the Dahar biological weapons program. Rows of containment units held various specimens, some recognizable, others entirely alien. Data screens displayed complex molecular structures and test results. In one section, she found multiple vzok specimens in various stages of development. Juno quickly planted her charges at key structural points throughout the facility, setting the timers for synchronized detonation. As she worked, she downloaded critical research data onto a portable drive, intelligence that would be invaluable to Alliance scientists. With her mission complete, Juno made her way back to where she had left the restrained Lazera. The reptilian commander had regained consciousness, but remained bound and unable to move. Juno hoisted her onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry, grunting under the weight but managing nonetheless. "What have you done?" Lazera demanded, sensing Juno's satisfaction. "Created a vacancy in the Dahar command structure," Juno replied flatly, "and ensured your biological weapons won't be deployed against any more Alliance personnel." They were barely a kilometer from the base when the charges detonated. The synchronized explosion sent a column of blue-white energy skyward. The specialized charges designed to neutralize biological agents while destroying infrastructure. The shock wave rippled across the ice plain, sending crystalline shards flying in all directions. Juno had positioned herself and her prisoner behind a rock formation, shielded from the worst of the blast. As the glow of the explosion faded, leaving only a smoking crater where the research facility had been, Juno resumed her journey toward her extraction point. The added weight of her prisoner made progress slow, but the intelligence value alone justified the effort. Through the long trek across the Devil's Icefield, Juno's mind turned to the implications of what she had discovered. The Dahar were clearly escalating their biological weapons program, a direct violation of the treaties established after the last major conflict. The vzok was likely just one of many such weapons being developed along the border regions. Near the crest of a ridge overlooking a vast ice plain, Juno activated her emergency transmitter, making contact with the Dialogue Mirage scout station. "Target neutralized. Commander Lazera captured. Intelligence gathered. Requesting extraction via stealth transport." The response came quickly. "Understood. Hold position. We're coming for you." While waiting for extraction, Juno secured her prisoner more comfortably, but no less effectively, against a rock formation. Lazera, despite her injuries and captivity, maintained the rigid dignity characteristic of Dahar military officers. "You've started a war, human," she hissed. Yellow eyes narrowed to slits. Juno checked the restraints one final time before responding. No, Commander. You started it when you deployed biological weapons in violation of the Geneva Interplanetary Convention. I'm just ensuring there will be consequences. My superiors will not allow this insult to stand, Lazara warned. The Dahar Union will respond with force beyond your imagination. Probably, Juno agreed dispassionately. But they'll do it without their advanced neurotoxin program, and without you. Hours later, as the stealth transport descended through Glacier Zill's turbulent atmosphere, Juno reflected on the mission's outcome. What had begun as a simple survival scenario after being shot down had evolved into something far more significant. The discovery and disruption of a major Dahar weapons program and the capture of a high-ranking officer. The transport's loading ramp extended, and a team of Alliance security personnel emerged to take custody of Lazara. The reptilian commander was secured in a reinforced containment chamber in the rear compartment, specialized restraints ensuring she would remain immobilized throughout the journey. Captain Fletcher handed over the data drive containing the research information she had extracted from the Dahar facility. Priority classification, she instructed the communications officer. This goes directly to Alliance Intelligence and the Biomedical Research Division. Yes, Captain. Anything specific they should know? Juno considered for a moment. The neurotoxin, VZAC, has potential applications beyond weapons. Based on my experience, it induces a temporary deep sleep state rather than death, at least in humans with military-grade immunization protocols. Could be valuable for treating chronic insomnia in combat veterans. The officer nodded, making note of this observation. Medical will be interested in that. Turning enemy weapons into treatments has good optics too. As the transport lifted off, leaving the frozen wasteland of Glacier Zill behind, Juno allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had survived, completed her mission, and acquired intelligence that could save countless Alliance lives. By any military standard, it was an unqualified success. Yet something troubled her as she watched the planet recede through the viewport. The face of Bella, the Lupin, in that moment before the bullet struck, the fear and resignation in those eyes. And Trita, the arachnoid, analytical until the very end, probably calculating the probability of survival, even as the shot tore through her sensor cluster. They had been enemies, yes, following orders, just as she was, but the ease with which life could be extinguished, regardless of species, weighed on her more heavily than she would admit to her colleagues. The political fallout from the incident was immediate and severe. The Dahar Union filed a formal protest with the Interplanetary Council, accusing the Human Alliance of kidnapping a military officer and destroying a research facility in neutral territory. They demanded Lazara's immediate return and reparations for the destruction of the base. The Alliance countered with evidence of the biological weapons program, arguing that such development constituted a direct threat to human settlements and military personnel in the border regions. The VZAC, they claimed, was just one example of the Dahar Union's willingness to violate established conventions on warfare. An international tribunal was convened to address the legal questions surrounding the incident. Was Captain Fletcher acting within the parameters of justified warfare, or had she committed an act of genocide by destroying the research facility and its personnel? Public opinion was divided, with some celebrating her as a hero who had neutralized a significant threat, while others questioned the proportionality of her response. Throughout the proceedings, Juno remained in temporary confinement, writing in a journal she had been permitted to keep. Victory feels hollow when examined too closely. As a soldier, I followed my training and accomplished my mission. But at what cost? The faces of Bella and Trita haunt my dreams. They were enemies, but they were also individuals with lives and purposes beyond our conflict. Did they deserve to die for following orders, just as I follow mine? And what of the countless Dahar personnel at the research facility? Were they all willing participants in weapons development, or simply scientists and support staff assigned to a post? The tribunal's deliberations continued for weeks. Expert testimony was presented regarding the nature of the Vizak neurotoxin and its potential applications, both as a weapon and, ironically, as a treatment for psychological conditions affecting soldiers. The Alliance defense argued that Captain Fletcher saved millions of lives by neutralizing a biological weapons facility that posed an imminent threat to border settlements. The Dahar prosecution countered that Fletcher committed an act of genocide against a species, violating the Interplanetary Geneva Convention. In the end, no final judgment was rendered. The tribunal called for additional evidence and testimony from biomedical experts to assess the true nature and intent of the Vizak program. The proceedings were adjourned, and Juno was released on her own recognizance, permitted to return to active duty with the Alliance forces, while awaiting the tribunal's reconvening. On a frozen planet, far from the political machinations of governments and tribunals, a lone warrior had taken a short nap and then turned the tide of a silent war. The only question that remained: would the neurotoxin that could save humanity from insomnia erase the memory of thousands of lives lost on the other side? The interplanetary world awaited the answer. As she returned to her quarters aboard the Alliance flagship, Juno found herself standing before the viewport, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Somewhere out there, Dahar forces were regrouping, reassessing, perhaps developing new weapons to replace what had been lost. The cycle would continue, as it had for centuries, between various species competing for resources and territory among the stars. Her hand unconsciously moved to her leg, where the Vizak had injected its neurotoxin. The wound had healed, leaving only a small scar. But the implications of that encounter extended far beyond her personal experience. The Dahar had created something that, while intended as a weapon, might ultimately benefit the very enemies it was designed to destroy. There was a certain irony in that which wasn't lost on Juno. A message notification flashed on her personal terminal. New orders, likely, or perhaps an update on the tribunal proceedings. Either way, duty called, as it always did. Captain Juno Fletcher straightened her uniform, set aside her philosophical misgivings, and turned to face whatever came next. In a universe of conflict and complexity, sometimes the only certainty was the next mission. And sometimes, survival came down to waking up when your enemies thought you were dead.